The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Clearwater, a town that had seen better days. The wooden buildings stood like weathered sentinels, their paint peeling under the relentless western sun. It was market day, but the usual bustle felt muted, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation of something dark about to unfold. Eleanor Wade stood at the window of her uncle's modest house, her fingers pressed against the cool glass. At 20, she possessed a quiet beauty that seemed out of place in this harsh frontier town. Her auburn hair was pinned back simply, and her blue dress, though mended in several places, was clean and pressed. She had risen early, as always, to prepare breakfast for her Uncle Amos, though the smell of whiskey on his breath from the night before told her he wouldn't be eating much. "Eleanor," Amos's voice boomed from the back room, rough with drink and something else she couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps. "Get yourself presentable, girl. We're going to town." A chill ran down her spine. Amos rarely took her anywhere, preferring to keep her hidden away like some shameful secret. Since her parents had died of fever 3 years ago, leaving her in his care, she had become little more than an unpaid servant in his household. But today felt different. There was a tremor in his voice, a nervous energy that made her stomach tighten with dread. She smoothed her dress and followed him out the door, noting how he avoided her eyes. The walk to the town square was short, but with each step, Eleanor felt the weight of unseen eyes upon her. Curtains twitched in windows as they passed. Women pulled their children closer. Men tipped their hats but wouldn't meet her gaze. The town square was crowded, but a hush fell as they approached. The gathering parted like the Red Sea, creating a pathway to the center where a lone figure waited. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Silas Vane sat atop a magnificent black stallion, as still as a statue carved from granite. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power, from his perfectly tailored black coat to the silver-handled pistol at his hip. But it was his face that made people step back, harsh angles and deep-set gray eyes that seemed to see through to one's very soul. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a pale line against sun-weathered skin. He was perhaps 35, though the hardness in his expression made him seem older. "Baron Stone," someone whispered, and the name rippled through the crowd like a prayer of fear. That's what they called him, though whether from his cold demeanor or the stone mansion he inhabited on Black Ridge, no one knew for certain. Amos grabbed Eleanor's arm, his fingers digging in painfully as he pulled her forward. She could feel him shaking. "Mr. Vane," he said, his voice cracking. "I've brought her, as agreed." Eleanor's world tilted. "Uncle, what?" "Quiet, girl," Amos hissed, not looking at her. He addressed Silas again, louder this time, as if volume could mask his cowardice. "She's 20 years old, healthy and strong, can cook, clean, sew, never been touched by any man, I swear it on my mother's grave. She'll make a fine." He paused, swallowing hard. "A fine addition to your household." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. She tried to pull away, but Amos's grip was iron. "Uncle, please, I don't understand." "The debt is cleared then," Amos interrupted, desperation naked in his voice. Silas Vane dismounted with fluid grace, his boots raising small clouds of dust as he approached. Up close, he was even more imposing, standing well over 6 feet. He circled them slowly, like a wolf studying prey, though his eyes never left Eleanor's face. "Miss Wade," he said finally, and his voice was deep, cultured, at odds with the roughness of his appearance. "Do you know why you're here?" Eleanor lifted her chin, finding courage in anger. "It seems my uncle has decided to trade me like cattle to settle his gambling debts." A muscle twitched in Silas's jaw. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Surprise approval. It was gone before she could identify it. $5,000, Amos said quickly. "That was the debt. She's worth at least that. Mr. Vane, good bloodline, educated. Her mother was a schoolteacher back east before. Enough! Silas's single word cut through Amos's babbling like a blade. He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and tossed it at Amos's feet. It landed with a heavy thud. Your debt is paid. Leave. Amos scrambled for the pouch, his dignity forgotten in his eagerness to claim the gold. He started to back away, then paused, perhaps feeling the weight of the crowd's judgment. Eleanor, your parents would have wanted. Don't! Eleanor's voice was steady, despite the tears threatening to fall. Don't you dare invoke my parents while selling me to pay for your whiskey and cards. Amos flushed red, then pale. Without another word, he turned and pushed through the crowd, clutching his blood money. Eleanor stood alone in the circle of watchers, her head high despite the trembling in her legs. Silas studied her for a long moment, then gestured to a covered wagon waiting at the edge of the square. Your belongings. I have none worth taking, Eleanor replied. It was true. Everything of value had been sold long ago to fund Amos's habits. Then we leave now. He moved toward his horse, then paused, looking back. You may ride in the wagon or walk. I won't force you. The crowd stirred uneasily. Everyone knew the stories about Silas Vane, how his young wife had died mysteriously just 2 years after their marriage, how he lived alone in that massive stone house, shunning all company, how men who crossed him had a way of disappearing, and now this innocent girl was being delivered into his hands like a lamb to slaughter. Eleanor looked around the square, searching for one sympathetic face, one person who might speak up. She found only averted eyes and tight lips. These people had watched her grow up, had bought bread from her mother's kitchen, had attended her parents' funeral. Now they stood silent as she was bartered away. Mrs. Pritchard, the minister's wife, clutched her shawl tighter and whispered to her husband, old Samuel, the blacksmith who had once bounced Eleanor on his knee, studied his worn boots. Even Sarah Mills, who Eleanor had considered a friend, turned away when their eyes met. The message was clear. Silas Vane was not a man to be challenged. Whatever debts Amos had incurred, whatever threats had been made, the town had decided that sacrificing one orphaned girl was preferable to facing the Baron's wrath. Eleanor walked to the wagon with measured steps, her spine straight. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. As she climbed onto the bench, she caught sight of young Timothy Peters, Sarah's brother, starting forward as if to protest. His father's hand fell heavy on his shoulder, pulling him back. Silas mounted his horse and took the wagon's reins. As they began to move, Eleanor turned for one last look at Clearwater. The crowd was already dispersing, eager to return to their lives, to pretend they hadn't just witnessed a young woman sold to settle a gambling debt. The wagon rolled steadily out of town, past the church where her parents were buried, past the schoolhouse where her mother had taught, past the small house that had once been filled with laughter and was now just another property for Amos to drink away. Neither she nor Silas spoke during the long ride. The only sounds were the creak of wagon wheels, the steady clop of hooves, and the whisper of wind through the sage. The landscape grew wilder as they left civilization behind, red rocks rising like ancient monuments from the desert floor. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Eleanor finally broke the silence. What do you intend to do with me? Silas didn't turn, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. That remains to be seen, Miss Wade. Am I to be a servant then? A cook, She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the darker possibilities that crowded her mind. You are what you choose to be, he said quietly. I've paid your uncle's debt. What happens next is between you and whatever God you pray to. It was not the answer she expected. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the evening. Behind them, Clearwater had long since disappeared, swallowed by distance and dust. Ahead lay Black Ridge and the stone mansion that would be her prison or her salvation. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Eleanor made herself a promise. Whatever awaited her in that cold stone house, whatever trials Silas Vane had in store, she would survive. She would not be broken by this man or any other. She had been traded like property. Yes, but she was nobody's possession. The wagon rolled on through the gathering darkness, carrying her toward an uncertain future, while somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. The moon had risen full and bright by the time they crested the final ridge. Eleanor's first glimpse of Black Ridge Manor stole the breath from her lungs. It rose from the landscape like something out of a Gothic novel, all dark stone and sharp angles against the star-studded sky. 3 stories of carved granite and iron, with towers at each corner and windows that gleamed like watching eyes. It was beautiful and terrible, a fortress built to withstand siege or storm. "My grandfather built it," Silas said, the first words he'd spoken in over an hour. "Brought stonemasons from Scotland. Took 10 years to complete." Eleanor found her voice. "It's overwhelming." That was the intent. A dry note entered his tone. The Vanes have always believed in making statements. As they approached the massive iron gates, they swung open silently. Though Eleanor saw no one manning them, the driveway curved through gardens gone wild, where roses climbed untended over statuary and fountains stood dry and cracked. Everything spoke of former grandeur slowly surrendering to neglect. The wagon stopped before carved oak doors that must have stood 15 feet tall. Silas dismounted and helped Eleanor down, his touch brief and impersonal. She noticed his hands were calloused despite his obvious wealth, the hands of a man who knew physical work. "Welcome to Black Ridge," he said, pushing open the doors to reveal a cavernous entrance hall. Candles flickered in wall sconces, casting dancing shadows on dark wood paneling and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. A massive staircase curved upward into darkness. Eleanor followed him inside, her footsteps echoing on marble floors. The air smelled of beeswax and old leather, with an underlying mustiness that spoke of rooms long closed. Despite the grandeur, there was an emptiness here, a hollow quality that made her wrap her shawl tighter. "Mrs. Henderson," Silas called, and an elderly woman emerged from the shadows so suddenly that Eleanor started. She was thin as a rail, dressed in severe black, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her face might have been carved from the same granite as the house. "Sir." "Mrs." Henderson said, her voice as dry as autumn leaves, her dark eyes fixed on Eleanor with an expression that could have meant anything or nothing. "This is Miss Wade. She'll need the blue room prepared." "Of course, sir, Mrs." Henderson's gaze never wavered. "Shall I have supper sent up?" "Yes." Silas turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Henderson will see to your needs. If you require anything, you need only ask." Eleanor found herself being led up the grand staircase before she could form a response. The housekeeper moved with surprising speed for her age, carrying a single candle that threw their shadows grotesquely on the walls. They passed through corridors lined with closed doors, their footsteps muffled by thick Persian runners. "Here we are, Mrs. Henderson said at last, opening a door to reveal a bedroom that took Eleanor's breath away, despite its name. The blue room was decorated in shades of midnight and silver. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, its curtains made of fabric that shimmered like water. A fire crackled in the hearth, and tall windows looked out over the wild landscape beyond. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said honestly. It was her room, Mrs. Henderson said, then pressed her thin lips together as if she'd said too much. Eleanor didn't need to ask whose room it had been. The ghost of Silas's dead wife seemed to linger in the very air. "How did she die?" The housekeeper's face went carefully blank. "That's not for me to say. Miss, your supper will be up directly. The Baron takes his breakfast at 7 sharp. You're free to join him or take meals in your room as you prefer." She left before Eleanor could ask anything else, the door clicking shut with a finality that made Eleanor test the handle. It turned easily. She wasn't locked in, at least not physically. Eleanor explored the room while waiting for her supper. The wardrobe held dresses that must have belonged to the previous misses. Vain, silk and satin things far finer than anything Eleanor had ever owned. They looked barely worn. A vanity table held crystal bottles of perfume, a silver brush and comb set, jewelry boxes that Eleanor didn't dare open. Everything had been preserved like a shrine, down to a half-finished piece of embroidery left on a chair by the window. A soft knock interrupted her exploration. A young maid entered with a tray, soup, fresh bread, cheese, and wine. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, with nervous hands and downcast eyes. "Thank you," Eleanor said gently. "What's your name?" "Rose, miss," the girl whispered, setting down the tray with shaking hands. "Have you worked here long?" "Rose." "2 years. Miss." Rose glanced at the door as if expecting someone to appear. "Will there be anything else?" "Just one thing. The previous Mrs. Vane. What was she like?" Rose went white. I never met her. Miss, she passed before I came." She bobbed a curtsy and fled. Eleanor ate mechanically, barely tasting the food. Outside her windows, clouds had rolled in, obscuring the moon. The house seemed to press in around her, full of unspoken secrets and old grief. Every creak of settling wood made her start. The fire popped and hissed, creating shadows that danced like phantoms on the walls. She tried to make sense of her situation. Silas hadn't touched her, hadn't made any improper suggestions. He'd given her a beautiful room, offered her food and comfort. Yet the very civility of it all made her more uneasy than threats would have. What did he want from her? Why had he paid such an enormous sum to claim her? The stories she'd heard in town painted him as a monster, a killer who'd murdered his young wife in a fit of rage. But the man she'd met seemed more cold than violent, more damaged than dangerous. Still, she knew better than to trust appearances. The most terrible wolves often wore the finest sheep's clothing. Sleep eluded her despite her exhaustion. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Amos's shame-faced betrayal, the town's silent complicity, Silas's unreadable gray eyes. When she finally dozed, she dreamed of being trapped in a stone tower while a woman in blue silk watched from the shadows, her face obscured by flowing dark hair. Eleanor woke to pale dawn light filtering through the curtains. The fire had died to embers, leaving the room cold. She dressed quickly in her own simple clothes, unwilling to touch the dead woman's finery, and ventured out into the corridor. The house looked different in daylight, but no less imposing. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight, and she could see now that many of the portraits were covered with sheets. She found her way to the main staircase through memory and instinct, following the smell of coffee and bacon to what must be the dining room. Silas sat at the head of a table that could have seated 20, reading a newspaper. He'd traded his black coat for a simple white shirt and vest, making him look younger and somehow more dangerous. A place had been set for her at his right hand. "Miss Wade," he acknowledged without looking up. "I trust you slept well." "As well as could be expected," Eleanor said carefully, taking her seat. "Mrs." Henderson appeared immediately with coffee and a plate laden with more food than Eleanor typically ate in a day. They ate in silence for several minutes before Eleanor's curiosity overcame her caution. "Why am I here?" Silas folded his newspaper with precise movements. "Your uncle owed me money. You were payment. I thought we'd established that." "That's how I came to be here," Eleanor said, surprised by her own boldness. "Not why. You could have taken his house, his business. Why take me?" Something shifted in his expression, there and gone like a cloud passing over the sun. "Perhaps I was curious." "About what?" "Whether Howard Wade's daughter had inherited his courage along with his eyes." Eleanor started. "You knew my father. We served together in the cavalry years ago. He saved my life once." Silas stood abruptly. "I have business to attend to. You're free to explore the house and grounds as you wish. There are only 2 rules: don't enter the West Tower, and don't go out alone after dark." "Why?" But he was already gone, leaving Eleanor with more questions than answers. She pushed her half-eaten breakfast away. Appetite fled. Her father had never mentioned knowing Silas Vane, but then he'd spoken little of his time in the military. Eleanor spent the morning exploring, partly from curiosity and partly to map potential escape routes. The house was even larger than it appeared from outside, a maze of rooms and corridors. She found a library that made her gasp with delight. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with more books than she'd ever seen. A music room with a grand piano covered in dust. A conservatory where exotic plants had grown wild, creating a jungle of green. But it was the signs of abandonment that struck her most. Rooms with furniture covered in sheets. Fireplaces that hadn't seen flame in years. Windows clouded with grime. It was as if the house had died with its mistress, leaving only the essential rooms in use. She was examining a painted portrait in the gallery when Mrs. Henderson found her. The painting showed a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, wearing the same blue dress Eleanor had found in her wardrobe. "That was her," the housekeeper said quietly. "Mrs. Catherine Vane, painted just after their wedding." "She was beautiful," Eleanor said, "and young. The girl in the portrait couldn't have been more than 18. She was—" Mrs. Henderson's voice held unexpected warmth. "Full of life, always laughing. She was going to fill this house with children. She said, 'Bring it back to life.'" "What happened to her?" The warmth vanished. "She died." "How?" "That's enough questions. Miss, the Baron wouldn't like us gossiping about the past." But as she turned to go, she paused. "A word of advice. Don't wander the house at night. And whatever you hear, stay in your room." Eleanor wanted to ask what she might hear, but the housekeeper was already gone, her black dress disappearing around a corner like a shadow fleeing light. That night, Eleanor lay in the great bed and listened to the house settle around her. Wind rattled the windows and set tree branches scraping against stone. Somewhere in the walls, pipes groaned and sighed, and beneath it all, so faint she might have imagined it, the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth, in the room above hers. She pulled the covers up to her chin and closed her eyes tight, but sleep was a long time coming. When it finally claimed her, she dreamed again of the woman in blue, but this time the woman was crying, and her tears were the color of blood. 3 nights had passed since Eleanor's arrival at Black Ridge Manor. 3 nights of footsteps above her room, of whispered voices in the walls, of shadows that moved when no one was there to cast them. The house seemed to breathe around her, alive with secrets and old sorrows. By the 4th night, she could bear it no longer. She had retired early, pleading a headache to avoid another silent dinner with Silas. The man remained an enigma, courteous but distant, generous with material comforts but miserly with words. He appeared and disappeared like a ghost himself, sometimes gone for hours on mysterious business. When he was present, his gray eyes seemed to look through her, as if seeing someone else entirely. Eleanor lay in bed fully dressed, waiting for the house to settle into its nightly routine. The footsteps began precisely at midnight, as they had each night before, back and forth, directly above her room. She counted to 100, then slipped out of bed and into the corridor. The hallway was pitch black, the wall sconces long extinguished. Eleanor felt her way along, guided by memory and moonlight filtering through tall windows. The servants' stairs at the end of the hall would take her to the 3rd floor. She had discovered them during her explorations. Her heart hammered as she climbed, each creak of old wood sounding loud as thunder in the silence. The footsteps continued above, unaware of her approach. At the top of the stairs, she paused. A thin line of light showed beneath a door at the far end of the corridor. Eleanor crept forward, barely breathing. Through the door, she could hear movement, not just footsteps now, but the rustle of fabric, the soft clink of glass. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. "I wouldn't." Eleanor spun around, a scream trapped in her throat. Silas stood behind her, materializing from the shadows like a specter. He wore only a white shirt and dark trousers, his feet bare on the cold floor. In the moonlight, the scar on his face appeared silver. "I told you not to wander at night," he said quietly. "I heard footsteps," Eleanor whispered, acutely aware of how close he stood. "Every night, someone paces in that room." "Yes." His expression was unreadable. "They do." "Who?" Instead of answering, he reached past her and opened the door. Eleanor gasped. The room beyond was a nursery, frozen in time. A wooden cradle stood by the window. Tiny clothes folded neatly on a changing table. Toys lined the shelves. A rocking horse, tin soldiers, a porcelain doll with glassy eyes. Everything waited for a child who had never come. And in the center of the room stood Mrs. Henderson, methodically folding and refolding infant blankets, tears streaming down her weathered face. "She comes here when she thinks I'm asleep," Silas said softly. "Has done every night for 2 years. But why? Because she blames herself." His voice held infinite weariness. "Catherine was with child when she died. Mrs. Henderson was her nurse, had been since Catherine was a baby herself. She believes if she keeps the nursery ready, someday." He didn't finish. Eleanor watched the old woman's ritual with new understanding. The careful way she smoothed each blanket, adjusted each toy, was the action of someone trying to hold back time itself. "We should leave her be," Eleanor said. Silas closed the door silently. They stood in the dark corridor, neither moving. Eleanor could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint scent of leather and tobacco. "The stories in town," she began, "are partly true." He turned away. "Come, if you're determined to break rules, you might as well know the whole truth." He led her not back to her room, but down to his study, a masculine space of dark wood and leather-bound books. A fire crackled in the grate. He poured 2 glasses of brandy, handed her one without asking if she wanted it. "Catherine was 18 when we married," he began, staring into the flames. "I was 31, recently returned from military service, inheriting a fortune I'd never wanted and a legacy of family madness. She was light itself, beautiful, spirited, determined to drag me into life whether I wished it or not." Eleanor sipped the brandy, feeling it burn down her throat. She stayed silent, afraid that any word might stop his confession. "For 2 years, we were happy, happier than I deserved. She made this tomb of a house into a home, filled it with laughter and music. When she told me about the child," his hand tightened on his glass, "I had never dared hope for such joy." "What happened?" "My cousin Marcus happened." The name came out like a curse. "He believed the estate should have been his. One night, while I was away on business, he came here with hired men. They meant to force Catherine to sign papers invalidating our marriage, claiming I had coerced her." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "She refused." "She fought them." Pride and pain warred in his voice. "My brave, foolish girl. She knew I kept weapons in the study, in the struggle." He drained his glass in one swallow. "She fell down the main staircase, 23 steps of solid marble. Oh God, I found her at the bottom when I returned the next morning. Still alive, barely. She lived 3 more days, long enough to tell me what happened, long enough to lose the baby, long enough to make me promise I wouldn't seek revenge." "But surely the law." Marcus had alibis. Witnesses who swore he was elsewhere. The hired men vanished like smoke. The sheriff suggested Catherine had been clumsy, that pregnant women often fell. His laugh was bitter. As if my Catherine had ever been clumsy a day in her life. Eleanor set down her glass, moved by an impulse she didn't fully understand. She reached out and touched his scarred cheek. He flinched, but didn't pull away. The scar. From the war. Catherine used to trace it with her finger. Said it made me look like a pirate. His voice broke slightly. I haven't let anyone touch it since. And Marcus died 6 months later. His heart gave out quite suddenly. Silas's smile was sharp as winter. The physician was baffled. Such a young, healthy man. Eleanor withdrew her hand slowly. She should have been frightened by the implication, but all she felt was a deep sadness for the man before her. So, you live here alone with your ghosts? Until 4 days ago. He looked at her directly for the first time since beginning his tale. Your father spoke of you often during our service. His brave little Eleanor. He called you. When I heard Amos Wade meant to sell his own niece to cover his debts, I intervened. To save me. Perhaps I'm simply selfish. He stood abruptly. It's late. You should rest. Eleanor rose as well, but at the door, she turned back. Silas? He looked surprised at her use of his given name. Thank you for telling me the truth. Something softened in his harsh features. Thank you for listening. Eleanor made her way back to her room, mind reeling with revelations. The monster of local legend was just a man, broken by loss and betrayal. The ghost that haunted Black Ridge was not Catherine, but the shadow of what might have been. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the sound. Horses approaching fast. Eleanor rushed to her window. Below, 3 riders dismounted in the courtyard. Even in the darkness, she recognized one of them. Thomas Brennan, her uncle's friend and fellow gambler, a man whose eyes had always lingered too long on her in town. Fear sliced through her. She flew from her room, taking the stairs 2 at a time. She found Silas in the entrance hall, fully dressed now and armed. They've come for me, she gasped. I know. His voice was calm, deadly. Stay behind me. The pounding on the door echoed through the hall. Open up, Vane. We know you're in there. Silas opened the door with deliberate slowness. The 3 men pushed inside, reeking of whiskey and violence. Brennan's eyes found Eleanor immediately, lighting with an ugly triumph. There she is, he slurred. Come here, girl. Your uncle's had a change of heart. Decided he wants you back. Amos has no claim on her, Silas said quietly. The debt was paid. Well, now there's a new debt. Brennan grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. See? Amos lost heavy again tonight. But lucky for him, I'm willing to take the girl as payment. Even used goods are better than none. Eleanor saw Silas's hand move to his gun, but she stepped forward before he could draw. I'm not going anywhere with you, mister. Brennan. Don't think you have a choice, missy. Brennan lurched toward her. Vane here can't keep you prisoner. We'll take you by force if need be. Try. Silas's voice could have frozen flame. Please, I insist. The other 2 men shifted nervously, suddenly aware they faced not some soft Eastern gentleman, but a man who'd survived years of frontier warfare. But Brennan was too drunk or too stupid to recognize the danger. Big talk for 1 man against 3. He reached for Eleanor. Several things happened very quickly. Silas moved like lightning, his fist connecting with Brennan's jaw with a crack like breaking wood. One of the other men went for his gun, but found himself staring down the barrel of Silas's Colt before he could clear leather. The 3rd man raised his hands, backing toward the door. Take your friend and go, Silas said, his gun never wavering. If I see any of you on my land again, I'll assume you're here to rob me and act accordingly. The sheriff tends to be understanding about such things. The 2 conscious men dragged Brennan out, his head lolling. At the door, one turned back. This ain't over. Vane, the girl belongs with her own kind. She belongs where she chooses to belong. Silas holstered his weapon. And from what I can see, she's made her choice." They left in a clatter of hooves and curses. Silas closed and barred the door, then turned to Eleanor. She was shaking, adrenaline making her knees weak. "They'll be back," she said. "Let them come." He studied her with those penetrating gray eyes. "The question is, do you want to be here when they do?" Eleanor thought of returning to town, to Amos's house, to a life of servitude and fear. She thought of Brennan's greedy eyes, of being passed from man to man like property. Then she looked at Silas, who had just risked violence to protect her, who carried such terrible grief with such dignity. "I have nowhere else to go," she said simply. "That wasn't what I asked." Eleanor lifted her chin, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. "I choose to stay." Something shifted in his expression, a wall crumbling. "Then stay you shall, but know this, if you remain here, you're under my protection. What's mine, I defend." "I'm not yours," Eleanor said softly. "No," he agreed. "But perhaps, in time, you might choose to be." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Then Mrs. Henderson appeared, drawn by the commotion, and the spell broke. But as Eleanor returned to her room, she felt something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer a prisoner or a payment. She was a woman who had made a choice. Outside her window, dawn was breaking over Black Ridge, painting the stone walls gold and rose. For the first time since arriving, Eleanor didn't hear ghostly footsteps or whispered voices. The house felt different, as if it too were slowly waking from a long, dark dream. She thought of Catherine, who had fought and died defending her home. Eleanor touched the window glass, making a silent promise to that brave ghost. She would not waste the second chance Silas had given her. She would not be driven away by threats or fear. Blackridge Manor had sheltered one love story that ended in tragedy. Perhaps it was time for a different ending to be written within these walls. The days following the midnight confrontation fell into an unexpected rhythm. Eleanor woke each morning to find small gestures waiting, a book of poetry left outside her door, fresh wildflowers on her breakfast tray, a wool shawl draped over her chair when the mornings turned cold. Silas never acknowledged these acts, maintaining his careful distance during their shared meals. But Eleanor recognized the thoughtfulness behind each gift. She began to see past his stern exterior to the man beneath, the way he unconsciously rubbed his scarred cheek when deep in thought, how his eyes softened when he thought she wasn't looking, the careful way he handled his late wife's belongings, as if they might shatter at rough touch. One morning, Eleanor found him in the kitchen garden, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in soil. She stopped in surprise. She'd never imagined the imposing Baron doing something as mundane as gardening. "My mother's roses," he said without looking up. "They've been neglected too long." Eleanor knelt beside him, not caring about her dress. "Show me." For the next hour, they worked side by side in comfortable silence. His hands, so quick with violence when needed, were infinitely gentle with the fragile plants. He showed her how to prune dead wood, how to coax new growth from seemingly barren stems. "Catherine tried to tend them," he said eventually. "But she had a black thumb, killed every plant she touched with too much love." Eleanor smiled at the image. "She sounds wonderful." She was. He sat back on his heels, studying her. "You're not afraid to get your hands dirty." "My mother kept a kitchen garden. I helped her every spring." The memory was bittersweet. "She said there was honor in making things grow." "A wise woman." He resumed working, but she caught the slight curve of his lips. "These roses will bloom come summer, white as snow." They gardened together each morning after that, the shared task creating a bridge between them. Eleanor discovered that beneath his forbidding presence, Silas possessed a dry wit and vast knowledge of plants. He'd learned from his mother. He told her, one of the few happy memories from a childhood marked by his father's harsh temper. Mrs. Henderson watched their growing ease with approval, her stern face softening whenever she saw them together. Even young Rose seemed less frightened, humming as she went about her duties. One afternoon, while Silas was attending to business in town, Eleanor explored the music room. The piano drew her like a magnet. She'd learned to play at her mother's knee but hadn't touched keys since her parents' death. Hesitantly, she lifted the cover and ran her fingers over the ivory. The first notes were uncertain, her fingers stiff from disuse. But muscle memory slowly returned, and soon a gentle melody filled the air, her mother's favorite hymn, lost in the music. She didn't hear Silas enter until the floor creaked behind her. "Don't stop," he said quietly when she startled. "Please." Eleanor continued playing, aware of him settling into a chair behind her. When the hymn ended, she transitioned into a folk song, then another. The music seemed to unlock something in the house itself, as if the walls were remembering happier times. "Catherine played," Silas said when she finally stopped. "Not well, but with enthusiasm. She'd bang away at dance tunes, making up words when she forgot them. Would you like me to stop if it brings painful memories?" "No." His voice was firm. "This house has been silent too long. Play whenever you wish." From then on, Eleanor played each evening after dinner. Sometimes Silas listened from his chair. Sometimes he stood by the window, watching night fall over his domain. Once, she caught him humming along to an old cavalry tune, though he fell silent when he realized she'd noticed. Their days took on a comfortable pattern, but change was coming. Eleanor felt it in the air like approaching storm. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Eleanor was in the library when she heard horses, not the wild gallop of night riders, but the steady pace of a formal visit. Through the window, she saw an elegant carriage draw up, followed by two armed outriders. A woman descended from the carriage with practiced grace. She was perhaps 40, still beautiful in the way of those who've never known hardship. Her traveling dress was the height of fashion, her blonde hair elaborately styled. Everything about her spoke of money and privilege. Eleanor heard the front door open, heard Silas's voice, carefully neutral. "Victoria, this is unexpected." "Hello, Silas?" The woman's voice was cultured, with a slight southern drawl. "Surely you didn't think I'd stay away forever." Eleanor crept to the library door. Peering out, the woman, Victoria, stood in the entrance hall as if she owned it, her gaze taking in every detail. When she spotted Eleanor, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "And who is this?" The question held an edge sharp as glass. "Miss Eleanor Wade," Silas said. "Eleanor, may I present Mrs. Victoria Ashford, my late wife's sister." Eleanor stepped forward, acutely aware of her simple dress and work-roughened hands. "How do you do?" Victoria's smile was cold as winter moonlight. "Miss Wade, how interesting. I wasn't aware Silas had taken in a ward." "I'm not his ward," Eleanor said quietly. "No," Victoria's gaze sharpened. "Then what exactly are you?" "A guest," Silas interjected smoothly. "To what do I owe this visit?" "Victoria." "Can't I visit my dear brother-in-law without reason?" She pulled off her gloves with deliberate movements. "It's been 2 years. Silas, I thought it time we discussed certain matters." "If you mean Catherine's inheritance." "Among other things." Her gaze returned to Eleanor, assessing. "Perhaps we could speak privately." "Eleanor stays," Silas said firmly. "Whatever you have to say can be said in front of her." Victoria's perfect composure cracked slightly. "How delightfully modern of you. Very well, I've come to make you an offer." She moved into the parlor as if assuming they'd follow, which they did. Eleanor noticed how Silas's jaw tightened, how his hand hovered near where his gun would normally rest. "I've been patient. Silas," Victoria began, settling onto the sofa with practiced grace. I've given you time to grieve, time to accept the truth, but certain decisions must be made. What truth would that be? That this house, this isolation, it's killing you. She leaned forward, her expression suddenly earnest. You're wasting away here with your ghosts and guilt. Catherine wouldn't want this. Don't. Silas's voice could have cut steel. Don't presume to tell me what Catherine would want. Who knew her better than I? Her own sister. Victoria's eyes glittered with unshed tears. Or perhaps it was calculation. She'd want you to live, Silas, to remarry, have children, continue the Vane line. Is that what this is about, the inheritance? Victoria had the grace to look offended. I'm thinking of you, and yes, of the family legacy. This estate has been in the Vane family for 3 generations. Would you let it die with you? The estate will go where I choose, Silas said coldly. To her, perhaps. Victoria gestured at Eleanor with barely concealed disdain. This nobody from nowhere, is that why she's here? Some misguided attempt to replace Catherine? Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could speak, Silas was on his feet. You go too far, Victoria. Do I? She rose as well, her composure cracking. You think I don't know why you paid her uncle's debt? Howard Wade saved your life, and now you save his daughter. How noble. But don't confuse obligation with affection. Silas, and don't think this girl could ever fill my sister's place. No one could fill Catherine's place, Eleanor said quietly. Standing, both Silas and Victoria turned to her in surprise. I wouldn't presume to try, but neither will I be made to feel ashamed for accepting kindness when it was offered. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Kindness, is that what you call it, my dear girl? You clearly don't know Silas as well as you think. Ask him about Marcus. Ask him what really happened to the men who hurt Catherine. I know enough, Eleanor said steadily. Do you know he was suspected of poisoning his own cousin, that the sheriff couldn't prove it only because Silas is too clever to leave evidence? Victoria's smile was triumphant. Do you know about the others who've crossed him and met mysterious ends? That's enough. Silas's voice was dangerously quiet. You've said your piece. Now leave. I'm trying to help you. Victoria's facade finally shattered completely. You're destroying yourself, and now you're dragging this innocent girl into your darkness. Let her go, Silas. Let me help you find a suitable wife, someone who understands our world. Together we can preserve what Catherine loved. What Catherine loved was life. Silas said, joy, laughter, music, everything you've never understood. Victoria, with your rules and proprieties and careful calculations. You want to preserve the estate. The money, take it all, but you'll not stand in my house and insult a woman worth 10 of you. Victoria went white, then red. You're making a mistake. When the town turns against you, and they will, mark my words, don't come crying to me. And you. She turned to Eleanor. Ask yourself what kind of man inspires such fear that an entire town would sacrifice you rather than oppose him. Ask yourself what he's truly capable of. She swept from the room in a rustle of silk and wounded pride. Minutes later, the carriage clattered away, leaving a silence that felt heavier than stone. Eleanor found Silas at the window, watching the dust settle. His shoulders were rigid with tension. She's wrong, Eleanor said softly. Is she? He didn't turn. I did kill Marcus. You know, not poison, that was too gentle. I challenged him to a duel, put a bullet through his black heart at 20 paces. All very legal and proper. He killed your wife and child. Yes, he finally faced her. And I'd do it again. Does that frighten you? Eleanor considered the question honestly. No, it makes you human. Something broke in his expression then. A wall crumbling after too long standing. Eleanor, I'm not going anywhere, she said firmly. Whatever Victoria thinks, whatever the town believes, I make my own choices. And I choose to stay. He crossed to her in 2 strides. Taking her hands in his, they were warm, calloused, gentle despite their strength. You don't know what you're risking. Then tell me. He studied her face as if memorizing every detail. Victoria will make trouble. She has friends, influence. She could make your life difficult. My life was already difficult. The town already whispers about you being here. This will make it worse. Let them whisper. His hands tightened on hers. I'm not an easy man. Eleanor, I have darkness in me. Ghosts that may never rest. I can't promise you in simple life. I don't want simple, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the truth of it. I want real. I want a life that means something, even if it's complicated. He lifted one hand to her cheek, his touch feather-light. You are extraordinary. I'm just a woman who knows her own mind. That, he said with the first genuine smile she'd seen from him, is what makes you extraordinary. They stood there, hands clasped, possibilities spinning between them like golden thread. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, but inside Black Ridge Manor, something new was taking root, fragile as spring roses, but with the potential to bloom into something beautiful. Mrs. Henderson, watching from the doorway, allowed herself a small smile before retreating to the kitchen. Perhaps, she thought, this house might know laughter again after all. Perhaps the ghosts could finally rest. But first, there would be battles to fight. Victoria Ashford did not accept defeat gracefully, and the town's judgment could be cruel. The path ahead would not be easy. Yet, as Eleanor played piano that evening, with Silas turning pages for her, their fingers occasionally brushing, both felt something they'd thought lost forever hope. It was enough to begin with. The rest, they would face together. The discovery came by accident, as such things often do. Eleanor had been at Black Ridge Manor for 3 weeks now, and the house had begun to reveal its secrets slowly, like a flower opening to trusted hands. She'd grown comfortable in its shadows, learned which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck, which windows caught the morning sun just right. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when she found it. Silas had ridden to town on business, leaving her to her own devices. Eleanor had intended to spend the day in the library, but the room felt oppressive with storm clouds pressing against the windows. Instead, she wandered the upper floors, drawn by restlessness she couldn't name. The third floor was largely unused, a maze of closed doors and dust-covered memories. Eleanor had explored some of it before, but always felt like an intruder here, where the past lay thick as summer heat. Today, however, something pulled her forward, perhaps the sound of rain on the roof, perhaps simple curiosity. She was examining a faded tapestry when she noticed a thin crack in the wall behind, too straight to be natural. Her fingers found a hidden catch, and a section of wall swung inward on silent hinges. Beyond lay a narrow room she'd never seen before. Eleanor stepped inside, heart pounding. The secret chamber was small but beautifully appointed. A writing desk stood by the single window, its surface covered in leather-bound journals, a comfortable chair, a shelf of books, dried flowers in a crystal vase. This had been someone's sanctuary. With trembling hands, Eleanor opened the top journal. The first page bore an inscription in elegant feminine script, "The Private Thoughts of Catherine Marie Vane, begun this 15th day of June, 1870. Eleanor sank into the chair. Catherine's journal clutched to her chest. She shouldn't read it. These were private thoughts, sacred memories, but the compulsion was too strong. Here was a chance to know the woman whose ghost haunted every corner of this house, whose death had broken the man Eleanor was coming to care for. The early entries painted a picture of a young bride deliriously in love. June 20th, S. brought me wildflowers today. Awkward as a schoolboy. This stern man who terrifies half the county blushed when I kissed him. I shall have to kiss him more often. July 3rd. The house feels so gloomy, all those portraits staring down in judgment. S. says I may redecorate as I wish. I shall start with the morning room. Yellow curtains to catch the sun." Eleanor smiled through sudden tears. Catherine's joy leaped from every page, her determination to bring light to the darkness of Black Ridge. But as Eleanor read on, the entries grew more complex. September 15th. Victoria visited today. My sister still disapproves of S, says I've married beneath me, as if bloodlines matter more than love. She cannot forgive him for being new money, for earning his fortune rather than inheriting it. I told her she was welcome to visit when she could speak civilly of my husband. She left in quite a temper. October 2nd, S suffers nightmares again. He will not speak of the war, but I hear him calling names in his sleep. Howard Wade features often. I wish I could ease his pain. Eleanor started at her father's name. The connection between him and Silas ran deeper than she'd realized. She read on, drawn into Catherine's world. December 1st. The most wonderful news I am with child. S wept when I told him. I have never seen him cry before. He is terrified and elated in equal measure. Already he speaks of names, of teaching our son to ride, our daughter to dance. The house shall ring with children's laughter at last. The entries grew sporadic after that, with gaps of weeks between them. Catherine wrote of morning sickness, of Silas's tender care, of preparing the nursery, but shadows crept in. March 3rd, 1871. Marcus visits too often. His cousin makes my skin crawl, the way he watches me when S is away. He speaks constantly of inheritance, of family legacy, as if our child is already dead. I do not trust him. March 20th. Caught Marcus in a study today, going through private papers. When confronted, he laughed and said he was merely familiarizing himself with his future inheritance. I told S we should bar him from the house. S says family is family, but I see the way his jaw tightens when Marcus is near him. Eleanor turned the page with growing dread. The next entry was dated a month later, the handwriting shaky. April the 25th. S departed yesterday for Colorado on urgent business. A mine collapse. Workers trapped. He did not want to leave with my time so near, but I insisted. Those poor families need him. I am well cared for here with Mrs. Henderson. What could go wrong in a week? The next page made Eleanor gasp. The writing was barely legible, stained with what could only be tears. April 28th. They came in the night, Marcus and 3 others, demanded I sign papers. When I refused, oh God, my baby, the pain, Mrs. Henderson fought them like a wildcat, but I fell, or was pushed, the stairs. So much blood. Baby coming too soon. Send for S, please. Someone send for S. There was only one more entry, written in a different hand. Mrs. Henderson's careful script. On May 1st, 1871, she lived 3 days, long enough to tell Mr. Silas everything, long enough to lose the baby, a little girl, perfect and still. She made him promise not to seek revenge through violence, made him swear it on her deathbed. He gave his word, though it nearly killed him. She passed at dawn, his name on her lips. May God forgive us all. Eleanor closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Now she understood so much. Silas's careful control, his fear of letting anyone close, the weight of keeping a promise that went against every instinct. He'd found justice for Catherine within the law, but at what cost to his soul? She was so absorbed in grief that she didn't hear footsteps until Silas spoke from the doorway. So you found her sanctuary? Eleanor spun, the journal falling from her lap. Silas stood there, rain-soaked and travel-worn, his expression unreadable. She waited for anger, for accusations of trespass. Instead, he moved into the room with careful steps, as if approaching a shrine. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything, he said quietly. It still smells of her perfume. Don't you think lilacs Silas, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. No. He picked up the journal, handling it like spun glass. Perhaps it's time. Perhaps she would want her story known, at least by someone who might understand. She loved you so much, Eleanor whispered. Every word speaks of it. And I failed her. His voice was flat, emotionless. I left her alone when she needed me most, chose duty to strangers over protecting my wife. You couldn't have known. Couldn't I? He set the journal down with infinite care. Marcus had been circling like a vulture for months. I saw the way he looked at her, at our happiness. Pride made me think family bonds would hold. Arrogance made me believe my name alone would protect her. Eleanor rose, moved by instinct to comfort. She didn't blame you. Even in her final entry, there's no accusation. That almost makes it worse. He turned to the window, watching rain streak the glass. Do you know what her last words were? Find love again. Silas, promise me. As if I deserved such grace. Maybe you do. He turned to her then, and she saw the rawness in his eyes, the barely healed wound that was his heart. I couldn't even keep my promise about revenge. Oh, I stayed within the law, challenged Marcus properly, faced him honorably. But I wanted him dead from the moment Catherine drew her last breath. When I pulled the trigger, I felt nothing but satisfaction. What kind of man does that make me? Human, Eleanor said simply. She crossed to him, laid a gentle hand on his arm. Catherine knew who you were. She loved you not despite your darkness, but including it. That takes a special kind of woman. Yes, he agreed, covering her hand with his. It does. They stood there in Catherine's secret room, surrounded by the artifacts of a lost love, while rain drummed against the windows. Eleanor felt the weight of the moment, the ghost of the past brushing against the possibility of a future. I should put these away, Silas said finally, gesturing to the journals. They're not meant for... No, Eleanor interrupted. Keep them here. Let her have this space, untouched, but maybe visit sometimes. Read her words. Remember the joy along with the sorrow. He studied her face. You truly are extraordinary, Eleanor Wade. I'm beginning to believe you might be too Silas vain. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Catherine would have liked you. You have the same fierce spirit, the same refusal to be cowed by my moods. I would have liked her too. They left the room together, Silas closing the hidden door with a soft click. But something had shifted between them. A wall crumbled by shared grief and understanding. That evening, when Eleanor played the piano, Silas sat beside her on the bench, adding his baritone to her soprano on the old hymns Catherine had loved. Mrs. Henderson, bringing their evening tea, found them thus and retreated with tears in her eyes. For the first time in 2 years, she felt hope that this house might heal, that the wounds of the past might finally begin to close. In Catherine's hidden sanctuary, her journals rested peacefully, their secrets told at last. And somewhere in the gentle fall of rain, in the mingling of two voices raised in song, a restless spirit found peace. Love had returned to Black Ridge Manor, different from before, marked by sorrow and wisdom, but love nonetheless. The past would always be with them, Eleanor realized, but it need not define their future. As Silas's hand found hers between the piano keys, she felt Catherine's blessing like a whisper of wind through lilac blooms. Some love stories end in tragedy. Yes, but others rise from the ashes, stronger for having been tested by fire. Outside, the storm was passing, and stars began to peek through breaking clouds, like hope itself made manifest in the darkening sky. The fever came without warning. One moment Eleanor was helping Mrs. Henderson prepare preserves for winter. The next she was swaying on her feet, the kitchen spinning around her. The jar she held slipped from nerveless fingers, shattering on the stone floor. Mercy, Mrs. Henderson breathed, catching Eleanor before she could fall. The older woman's hand flew to Eleanor's forehead. You're burning up. child. Everything after that blurred together like watercolors in rain. Eleanor remembered being half carried upstairs, remembered Mrs. Henderson's worried face, remembered trying to protest that she was fine, just tired. Then the world dissolved into heat and shadows. She drifted in and out of consciousness, lost in fever dreams that tangled past and present. Sometimes she was a child again, safe in her mother's arms. Sometimes she stood at the foot of a great staircase, watching a woman in blue fall endlessly through space. Often, she called out for people who couldn't answer, her parents, gone these 3 years. And, strangest of all, a woman she'd never met. "Mara," she whispered into the darkness. "I'm sorry, Mara." Strong hands gripped her shoulders, a deep voice penetrating the haze. "There is no Mara here. Eleanor, look at me." She forced her eyes open. Silas's face swam into focus, haggard with worry. Behind him, she glimpsed Dr. Morgan from town, Mrs. Henderson wringing her hands, Rose hovering with basins of water. When had they all come? The spring fever. She heard the doctor say, "Seen too much of it this year. Keep her cool, plenty of fluids. The next day or two will tell." Eleanor tried to speak, to say she was fine, but words wouldn't come. Silas's hand smoothed her hair back from her burning forehead, and she leaned into the coolness of his touch. "Rest," he commanded gently. "I'm here." Time became elastic. Day blended into night and back again. Eleanor was dimly aware of constant presence, someone always beside her, bathing her face with cool cloths, spooning water between her cracked lips. Sometimes it was Mrs. Henderson, sometimes Rose, but most often it was Silas. He read to her from Catherine's favorite books, his voice a steady anchor in the storm of fever. He told her stories of his childhood, of the roses his mother grew, of learning to ride on a horse named Thunder. When delirium took her and she cried out in fear, he held her hands and promised she was safe. "Don't leave me," she begged once, not sure if she meant now or forever. "Never," he swore, and she believed him. On the third night, the fever reached its peak. Eleanor thrashed in the grips of nightmare, calling for her parents, for Catherine, for Mara. Always Mara. She was back on that staircase, watching someone fall, reaching out but unable to help. "Who is Mara?" Silas asked desperately. "Eleanor, who is Mara?" But she couldn't answer, lost too deep in dreams. Her breathing grew labored, her skin burning despite the cool cloths. "Doctor." Morgan was summoned again, his face grave as he examined her. "There's nothing more I can do," he admitted. "It's in God's hands now." "Get out," Silas said quietly, dangerously. "If you can't help her, get out." After the doctor fled, Silas dismissed everyone else too, alone with Eleanor. He did something he hadn't done since Catherine died. He prayed. "Please," he whispered, gripping Eleanor's hand. "Not again. I can't lose her too. Take anything else, the house, the fortune, my life, but not her." Eleanor's breathing grew worse, rattling in her chest, in her delirium. She called out again, "Mara, I'm sorry. Should have helped. Should have." Silas leaned close, desperation making him bold. He pressed his lips to her burning forehead, her temple, her cheek. "You're not Mara," he said fiercely. "You're Eleanor, my Eleanor, and you will not die. I won't let you. Do you hear me?" He pulled her into his arms, holding her against his chest, and began to speak. He told her about the future he'd begun to imagine, the two of them working in the garden, filling the house with music and laughter. Children playing in the halls Catherine had hoped to see filled, growing old together, watching sunsets from the western tower. "I love you," he said, the words torn from somewhere deep inside. "I thought I'd never say those words again, never feel this way again. But you've brought me back to life. Eleanor Wade, you can't leave me now." Through the long night he held her, whispering promises and pleas. As dawn approached, something shifted. The terrible heat began to break. Her breathing eased. When Eleanor finally opened her eyes, truly aware for the first time in days, she found herself cradled in Silas's arms. He looked terrible, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his clothes wrinkled beyond recognition. "Silas!" Her voice was barely a whisper. His eyes flew open, wild hope replacing despair. "Eleanor, thank God!" "Water," she managed. He helped her drink, hands shaking. "You've been ill. 3 days. We thought—" His voice broke. "I heard you," she said wonderingly. "Through the fever, you stayed. Where else would I be?" She studied his exhausted face, seeing something new there, something that hadn't been present before her illness. "You said, did you mean it?" He knew what she meant without asking. Every word. "I dreamed of a woman named Mara. I don't know why. She was falling, and I couldn't save her." Silas smoothed her hair back. "Just fever dreams. You're safe now?" But Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that Mara meant something, was someone important. The name echoed in her mind like a half-remembered song. Recovery was slow. For a week. Eleanor could barely lift her head from the pillow. Silas refused to leave her side, conducting what business he had from a chair by her bed. He read to her, talked to her, simply sat in comfortable silence when she needed rest. It was during one of these quiet moments that Eleanor truly saw how her illness had affected him. He'd lost weight, shadows dark beneath his eyes. When he thought she was sleeping, his face showed naked fear, as if he still couldn't quite believe she'd survived. "You look terrible," she told him one afternoon. "You look beautiful," he countered, then seemed surprised by his own words. Eleanor felt heat in her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. "Silas, when you're well," he said quietly, "we need to talk about the future, about us. Is there an us?" His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "If you'll have me, I'm not an easy man. Eleanor, I come with ghosts and shadows, but I promise you this. You'll never doubt that you're loved. Never wonder if you matter. You've given me something I thought lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope." Mrs. Henderson, entering with afternoon tea, found them thus, hands clasped, gazing at each other with expressions that needed no words. She retreated silently, but not before Eleanor caught her small, satisfied smile. As days passed and strength returned, Eleanor began to notice changes in the house. Fresh flowers appeared daily in her room. The heavy curtains in the hallways had been pulled back, letting in light. She could hear activity below. Cleaning, repairs, the house coming alive again. "What's happening?" she asked Rose one morning. The girl beamed. "Mr. Silas ordered it. Miss said the house had been in mourning long enough. Said it was time to prepare for happier days." When Eleanor was finally strong enough to leave her room, Silas insisted on carrying her downstairs himself. She protested that she could walk, but he wouldn't hear of it. "Let me do this," he said softly. "Let me take care of you." He set her gently on the library sofa, where a fire crackled cheerfully and tea waited. Through the windows, Eleanor could see the garden where they'd worked together. The roses were budding, preparing to bloom. "I thought I'd lost you," Silas said suddenly, "when you were calling for Mara, when your fever wouldn't break. I realized how empty this house would be without you, how empty I would be." Eleanor reached for his hand. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I know secrets aren't fashionable between couples, but there's something you should know. About Mara." Eleanor's heart skipped. "She's real." "She was Catherine's cousin. Died of fever the year before Catherine and I married. Catherine nursed her through the illness. Blamed herself when Mara passed. She used to have nightmares, calling out just as you did. How strange that I would dream of her. Perhaps not so strange. This house holds memories. Sometimes I think the walls themselves remember. He squeezed her hand. But you're here, alive and well. That's what matters. That evening, for the first time since her illness, Eleanor played the piano. Her fingers were weak, the music simpler than usual. But Silas listened as if it were the finest concert. When she finished, he applauded softly. "Will you teach me?" he asked suddenly. Eleanor blinked in surprise. "To play?" "My mother tried when I was young, but I was too stubborn, too convinced it wasn't masculine." He smiled ruefully. "I'd like to learn now, to play the songs you love." "I'd be honored." They sat together on the bench, Eleanor guiding his hands on the keys. His fingers were clumsy at first, too used to reins and firearms. But he was a determined student, and soon picked out a simple melody. "You're a natural," Eleanor said. "I have an excellent teacher." He turned to face her, their proximity on the small bench suddenly electric. "Eleanor." "Yes." Instead of words, he answered with a kiss, gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if afraid she might break. Eleanor had never been kissed before, but instinct guided her, her hands rising to frame his face. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I should apologize," Silas said. "Don't you dare." He laughed then, really laughed, the sound transforming his face. "As you wish, my dear." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Inside Black Ridge Manor, two souls who'd found each other across loss and loneliness sat close together, planning a future neither had dared imagine. The house around them seemed to sigh with contentment, its long mourning finally drawing to a close. There would be challenges ahead. Eleanor knew that. The town to convince, Victoria's certain disapproval, the ghosts of the past to fully lay to rest. But sitting there with Silas's arm around her, listening to him stumble through a simple tune with determined concentration, Eleanor felt none of it mattered. She'd been given away like a debt, arrived at Black Ridge expecting imprisonment or worse. Instead, she'd found love, purpose, a home, and in saving her from fever's grip, Silas had shown her the depth of his feelings more clearly than any words could convey. "Play something for me," he requested, "something happy." Eleanor smiled and began a lively dance tune, the kind Catherine might have loved. And for the first time in 2 years, the music that filled Black Ridge Manor spoke not of sorrow, but of joy. Not of endings, but of bright beginnings yet to come. The peace of recent weeks shattered like glass on a moonless night. Eleanor woke to the sound of breaking wood and rough voices. For a moment, she thought it was another fever dream, but the acrid smell of smoke and the orange glow beneath her door were terrifyingly real. She flew from bed, not bothering with a wrapper over her nightgown. In the hallway, smoke billowed from the direction of the main stairs. Through the haze, she could see flames licking at the portraits, consuming the past in hungry gulps. "Silas!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar of fire and the crash of something heavy falling below. Strong hands grabbed her from behind. Eleanor whirled, relief flooding her at the sight of Silas, fully dressed with his gun belt already strapped on. "The west stairs," he said urgently, pulling her along. "They've blocked the main entrance." "They?" "Danton's men. Stay close." Cole Danton. Eleanor had heard the name whispered in town, a cattle baron who'd been feuding with Silas over water rights for years. But to attack the house, to set it ablaze. They raced down the servants' stairs, the smoke less dense here but growing. Behind them, Eleanor could hear Mrs. Henderson's voice raised in alarm, Rose's frightened cries. Silas paused at a landing, torn between protecting Eleanor and helping his household. "Go," Eleanor said. "Get them out. I'll find my own way." "No, you stay with me or not at all." They burst into the kitchen to find it already occupied. 3 men stood between them and the door, bandanas covering the lower half of their faces. One held a torch, ready to spread more destruction. "Well, well," the largest said, his voice muffled but familiar. "The high and mighty Silas Vane, not so powerful now. Are you—" "Let the women go, Danton," Silas said calmly, positioning himself in front of Eleanor. "Your quarrel is with me." Danton pulled down his bandana, revealing a scarred face and cold eyes. "Everything you care about is my quarrel. Vane, you took my brother's land. Now I take your house. Seems fair. Your brother lost that land in a legal sale." "Legal?" Danton spat the word. "Because you had the judge in your pocket. But there's a higher justice than law books." One of his men shifted nervously. "Boss, the fire's spreading fast. We should go." "Not yet." Danton's gaze fixed on Eleanor, and his smile turned predatory. "This your new woman? Vain, pretty little thing. Be a shame if something happened to her." Silas's hand moved to his gun, but Danton was faster. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Silas grunted, his hand flying to his shoulder where red bloomed across his white shirt. "No," Eleanor started forward, but Silas caught her with his good arm. "Well, now," Danton said conversationally, his smoking gun still trained on them. "Here's what's going to happen. The girl comes with us. You can burn with your precious house. Vain, fitting end for a murderer." "I'll die first," Eleanor said fiercely. "That can be arranged." Danton nodded to his men. "Take her." What happened next occurred with lightning speed, despite his wound. Silas moved like the cavalry soldier he'd once been. His gun cleared leather and fired in one smooth motion. Danton's weapon flew from his hand. The torchbearer dropped his flame, scrambling for his own weapon. But Silas was already moving. He shoved Eleanor behind the heavy kitchen table as gunfire erupted. Splinters flew as bullets struck wood. Eleanor heard Silas grunt again, hit a second time, but he kept firing with deadly accuracy. Through the chaos, she heard new voices, misses. Henderson's Scottish brogue raised in fury. The thunder of feet on stairs, the household staff, armed with whatever they could find, poured into the kitchen. Old Tom the groundskeeper wielded an ancient musket. Even Rose held a kitchen knife with grim determination. Faced with unexpected resistance, Danton's men wavered. One was already down, clutching his leg. Another backed toward the door, hands raised. "This isn't over, Vane," Danton snarled, retreating with his wounded man. "You can't protect her forever." They fled into the night, leaving smoke and chaos behind. Eleanor scrambled to Silas, who'd slumped against the wall. Blood soaked his shirt from 2 wounds, shoulder and side. "We need the doctor," she said desperately. "First the fire," he gasped. "Save the house." It was Mrs. Henderson who took charge, organizing a bucket brigade while Eleanor tended Silas. The fire had consumed much of the main staircase and entrance hall, but the stone walls contained it. By dawn, exhausted and soot-stained, they'd beaten back the flames. "Doctor," Morgan arrived as the sun rose, his face grim as he examined Silas's wounds. "The shoulder's clean, but this one in his side. I need more light. And hot water. Lots of it." They moved Silas to his bedroom, Eleanor refusing to leave his side. She held his hand as the doctor worked, extracting the bullets with agonizing care. Silas bore it stoically, but his grip on her hand was crushing. "There, doctor," Morgan said finally, bandaging the wounds. "He's lucky. An inch to the left and that second bullet would have found something vital. But he's lost a lot of blood. Keep him still. Keep the wounds clean. Time will tell." After the doctor left, Eleanor sat vigil. Silas drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering commands to soldiers only he could see, calling for Catherine, for her, when fever threatened. She bathed his face with cool water, echoing the care he'd shown during her own illness. "Can't lose you," she whispered, pressing her lips to his burning forehead. Do you hear me? Silas Vane, you saved my life. Now let me save yours. Through the day and into the night she stayed, refusing all suggestions that she rest. Mrs. Henderson brought food she didn't eat, tea that grew cold untouched. All that mattered was the rise and fall of Silas's chest, the flutter of his pulse beneath her fingers. Near midnight, he stirred, eyes focusing on her face. Eleanor. I'm here. The house. Damaged but standing, like its master. A ghost of his usual smile. Stubborn things, we Vanes. Thank God for it. She smoothed his hair back, noting with relief that the fever seemed to be breaking. Why did they come, really? Silas was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, Cole's brother Samuel died last year. Drink and bad decisions. But Cole blames me, says I destroyed him. Maybe I did. I showed no mercy in that land deal, used every legal advantage. He shifted, wincing. Catherine would have counseled compassion. You would have, but I only knew hardness then. You protected what was yours. Yes, and made an enemy who'll stop at nothing. His good hand found hers. He meant what he said. He'll come for you. I've put you in danger just by caring for you. I was in danger the moment my uncle brought me to that town square. Eleanor said firmly. You gave me safety, a home, love, worth any risk. If anything happened to you because of me, nothing will happen. We'll face whatever comes together. He studied her face in the lamplight. How did I deserve you? By being the man who stayed by my bedside for 3 days, who reads to me and learns piano for me and looks at me like I'm precious. She leaned down, kissing him softly. By being yourself. A commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Tom burst in, his weathered face grim. Riders coming, Mr. Vane, lots of them. Silas tried to rise, but Eleanor pressed him back. You're in no condition to fight. I won't lie here while... You will. She stood, surprising herself with her own authority. Tom, gather everyone who can hold a weapon. Mrs. Henderson, bar the doors. Rose, help me move Mr. Vane somewhere safer. Eleanor, you can't... I can, and I will. She checked the load on the pistol Silas had taught her to use. This is my home now, too. I'll defend it. But when Eleanor reached the damaged entrance hall, she saw not Danton's masked riders, but a dozen men from town. At their head rode Sheriff Watson, his badge glinting in the torchlight. Miss Wade, he called. We heard there was trouble. Eleanor kept the pistol ready, but lowered it slightly. Bit late, aren't you, Sheriff? Watson had the grace to look ashamed. We came as soon as we could. Is Vane alive? No thanks to the response time of the law. Now, miss, that's not entirely fair. Isn't it? Eleanor's voice could have cut steel. Where was the law when I was sold like cattle? Where was it when armed men attacked our home? The men shifted uncomfortably. In the crowd, Eleanor spotted familiar faces, merchants who'd watched silently as she was given away, neighbors who'd turned their backs on her plight. Young Timothy Peters urged his horse forward. We were wrong, Miss Wade, all of us. We let fear rule us, but when we saw the fire, heard the gunshots, well, a man can only stand by so long. Pretty words. Eleanor said, What do you intend to do about it? Sheriff Watson straightened in his saddle. We're going after Danton, tonight. What he did here was attempted murder and arson. The whole territory will be looking for him come dawn. And us, Eleanor gestured to the damaged house. What about us? An older man Eleanor recognized as Mr. Jameson, the bank president, spoke up. We'll help rebuild. It's the least we can do. And Miss Wade, what was done to you? It wasn't right. We all know it. Eleanor felt some of her anger drain away. These weren't bad men, just weak ones. Fear had ruled them, but perhaps courage was contagious. Mr. Vane is wounded, she said. He'll need protection while he recovers." "You'll have it," Sheriff Watson promised. "I'll post men here myself. Danton won't get another chance." As the riders dispersed to hunt for Danton, Eleanor returned to Silas. He was awake. Mrs. Henderson, having reported the conversation. "You turned them around," he said wonderingly. "The whole town." "They turned themselves, just needed reminding what courage looks like." She sat beside him, suddenly exhausted, though I suspect your reputation for dealing with enemies helped motivate them. "Our reputation now." He caught her hand. "You stood for this house, stood for us. I've never seen anything braver. You were shot twice defending me. I'd say we're even." "Never even. I'll spend a lifetime trying to deserve you." Eleanor lay down beside him, careful of his wounds. "Start by healing. We have a house to rebuild, a future to plan. And Danton will be dealt with by the law, as it should be." She felt him relax beside her. "Rest now. I'll keep watch." As dawn broke over Black Ridge Manor, painting the fire-damaged stones in soft gold, Eleanor reflected on the night's events. They'd been tested by violence, marked by fire, but they'd survived. More than that, they'd found unexpected allies, turned fear into support. Beside her, Silas slept peacefully, his breathing deep and even. His wounds would heal. The house would be rebuilt, stronger than before, and Danton would learn what Eleanor had discovered, that love was stronger than hate, that two people standing together could face down any threat. She'd come to Black Ridge expecting to be a prisoner. Instead, she'd become a defender, a partner, a woman who knew her own strength. The fire had destroyed much, but from the ashes would rise something new and stronger. A home built not on fear or isolation, but on love, courage, and the promise of tomorrow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the scorched stones of Black Ridge Manor as Eleanor stood before the assembled crowd. Word had spread through the county like wildfire. The girl who'd been given away as payment for a gambling debt would speak. They came in wagons and on horseback, filling the courtyard and spilling onto the grounds. Some came from curiosity, others from guilt, many from a desire to witness what would happen next. Eleanor wore her best dress, not one of Catherine's fine gowns, but the simple blue cotton she'd mended with her own hands. Beside her stood Silas, still pale from his wounds but refusing to show weakness. His presence was a statement in itself. They stood together, united, unashamed. Sheriff Watson had returned an hour before with news of Cole Danton's capture. The outlaw had been found hiding in an abandoned mine shaft, wounded and defiant to the end. Justice would be served. But that wasn't why Eleanor had asked the sheriff to gather the townspeople. "I know why you're here," Eleanor began, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "You've come to see the woman who was traded like livestock, who survived fire and bullets, who stands beside the man you all fear." A ripple of unease went through the gathering. Eleanor saw familiar faces, Mrs. Pritchard clutching her Bible, Samuel the blacksmith, even her Uncle Amos, skulking at the edges like the coward he was. 6 weeks ago, I stood in Clearwater's town square while my uncle sold me to pay his debts. Not one of you spoke up. Not one of you stood between a young woman and a fate you all believed would be terrible. "Now, Miss Wade," Mayor Hutchins began, but Eleanor raised her hand. "I'm not finished." Her gaze found Amos. "Uncle, come forward." Amos shrank back, but the crowd parted, leaving him exposed. Reluctantly, he shuffled forward, unable to meet her eyes. "Tell them," Eleanor commanded. "Tell them the truth about my father's estate." "I don't know what you mean." "The truth," her voice cracked like a whip. "Or shall I have Sheriff Watson investigate where my inheritance went?" Amos's shoulders slumped. I took it. When your parents died. There was money, the house. I gambled it away. Every penny." Gasps rose from the crowd. Eleanor nodded grimly. So when your debts came due, you had nothing left to sell but me. Eleanor, I'm sorry. I don't want your apologies. She turned back to the crowd. I want everyone here to understand something. I was not given to Silas Vane as payment for a debt. I was stolen from, betrayed, and abandoned by those who should have protected me. And yet, she reached for Silas's hand, intertwining their fingers. And yet, I found something here I never expected. I found a man of honor, despite what you all believe. A man who gave me shelter without conditions, who treated me with respect and kindness, who nearly died defending me. He's a killer, someone shouted from the back. He murdered his own cousin. Silas tensed, but Eleanor squeezed his hand. Marcus Kendrick attacked a pregnant woman in her own home, she said clearly. He caused her death and that of her unborn child. Silas challenged him honorably and faced him fairly. How many of you would have shown such restraint? Silence answered her. You call him Baron Stone. Whisper about him like he's a monster. But I'll tell you what I've learned. Silas Vane is a man who tends his mother's roses with gentle hands, who reads poetry by firelight, who spent 3 days at my bedside when fever nearly took me, who learned to play piano because it brought me joy. She felt Silas's fingers tighten around hers, giving her strength to continue. Yes, he's capable of violence when protecting what he loves, as am I, as any of you would be, but he's also capable of great tenderness, deep loyalty, and a love I never dreamed I'd find. Eleanor's gaze swept the crowd, landing on the younger faces, Timothy Peters, Rose's sister Martha, others who might yet choose differently than their parents. I called you here today not to shame you, though shame is warranted. I called you to witness a choice. I was brought to Blackridge Manor against my will. That's true, but I choose to stay. Not as property, not as payment for debt, but as myself, Eleanor Wade, free woman, making her own decisions. She turned to face Silas fully, speaking loud enough for all to hear. Silas Vane, before these witnesses, I declare myself no man's property but my own. I choose to remain at Blackridge not because I must, but because I wish to, because I love you, and because this is my home. Emotion flickered across Silas's scarred face. Surprise, joy, and something deeper. He lifted their joined hands to his lips. Before these witnesses, he replied, his deep voice carrying, I declare the debt that brought you here null and void. You owe nothing to anyone. You are free to stay or go as you will. Then I will stay. The crowd stirred restlessly. This wasn't what they'd expected. No dramatics, no pleading for rescue, no condemnation of the man they'd painted as a villain. Instead, they faced a young woman claiming her own power, making her own choices. Mrs. Pritchard stepped forward, her weathered face conflicted. But my dear, surely you can't mean to stay here unmarried. What will people say? Eleanor smiled. I imagine they'll say quite a lot. Mrs. Pritchard. They always do, but I've learned not to live my life by the whispers of others. But your reputation? My reputation, Eleanor laughed, not unkindly. My reputation was destroyed the moment my uncle dragged me into that square. But here's what I've discovered. Reputation is what others think of you. Character is who you truly are. I'll take character over reputation any day. Young Sarah Mills, Eleanor's former friend, pushed through the crowd. Eleanor, I'm sorry. I should have said something that day. We all should have. Eleanor studied her, seeing genuine remorse. What's done is done. Sarah, but you have a choice now. All of you. You can continue living in fear, letting the strong prey on the weak, turning away when injustice happens before your eyes. Or you can choose differently. What would you have us do? It was Samuel, the blacksmith, his voice gruff with emotion. Look after each other. Speak up when you see wrong being done. Stop letting fear rule your hearts. Eleanor's voice softened. I won't pretend Silas is an easy man or that crossing him is wise, but he's fair to those who deal fairly, kind to those who show kindness. The monster you fear exists mainly in your own minds. Sheriff Watson cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Miss Wade, Mr. Vane, you'll have no more trouble from the law. What happened here with Danton proved where right stands. And the bank stands ready to help rebuild what was damaged. Mr. Jameson added quickly. No interest on the loans, of course. Eleanor saw the shift happening, fear giving way to respect, isolation breaking down. It would take time, but perhaps Black Ridge need not stand apart forever. There's one more thing, she announced. The manor will be hiring workers for the rebuild. Good wages for honest work. We'll also be opening the East Gardens for a weekly market, Mrs. Henderson's preserves, vegetables from our gardens, flowers for those who want them. Black Ridge will no longer be a place apart. Murmurs of interest rippled through the crowd. Work was scarce, and Vane's money was good as any. Silas leaned close to her ear. You're full of surprises, my dear. I learned from the best, she murmured back. As the crowd began to disperse, many lingering to speak with Tom about work, Eleanor noticed Amos trying to slip away. She called out, stopping him. Uncle. He turned, face wretched. Eleanor, what I did was unforgivable, she finished. But I forgive you anyway. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carrying hatred is too heavy a burden. She studied him, this broken man who'd once been her father's brother. Leave town. Uncle, start fresh somewhere. Try to be better. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks. Howard would be proud of you. He choked out, Your mother, too. I hope so. As Amos shuffled away, probably forever. Silas wrapped his good arm around Eleanor's waist. That was remarkably generous. Catherine forgave those who wronged her. She seems a good example to follow. They stood together, watching their neighbors. For that's what they were now, truly. Organize work crews and discuss the market. Children who'd been kept away from Baron Stone's cursed manor now played in the courtyard while their parents planned for employment. You've changed everything, Silas said wonderingly. In a few words, you've undone years of fear and suspicion. Not undone, just redirected. Eleanor leaned into his warmth. They needed to see you through different eyes. My eyes. And what do your eyes see? She turned in his embrace, reaching up to trace the scar on his cheek. A man worth loving, a home worth fighting for, a future worth building. He caught her hand, pressing it to his heart. Marry me. The words hung between them like suspended stars. Around them, life swirled on, workers planning, children laughing, the business of living. But for Eleanor and Silas, the world narrowed to just this moment. Not because of propriety, he continued urgently. Not because of what they think, but because I love you, because you've brought light back into my darkness, because I can't imagine facing tomorrow without you beside me. Yes, Eleanor said simply. Yes, of course, yes. He kissed her then, there in the courtyard for all to see. Not a claiming, but a celebration. A promise made before witnesses who finally understood that love could bloom even in the rockiest soil. When they parted, Eleanor saw Mrs. Henderson wiping her eyes, Rose clasping her hands in delight. Even some of the townspeople were smiling, caught up in the simple joy of two people finding each other against all odds. When? Silas asked, his stern face transformed by happiness. When you're fully healed. When the house is rebuilt, when the roses bloom. Eleanor smiled. We've earned the right to do things properly, don't you think? Anything you want, everything you want. As the sun climbed higher, warming the fire-scarred stones, Eleanor looked out over the transformed scene, where once there had been fear and isolation. Now there was community forming. Where once she'd been a possession, now she was a partner. Where once there'd been only ghosts and sorrow, now there was hope and purpose. She'd stood before them all and claimed her freedom, her choice, her love. And in doing so, she'd freed them all from fear, from complicity, from the weight of unspoken wrongs. The girl who'd been given away had become a woman who gave others permission to be better. Blackridge Manor would rise from its ashes, stronger and more beautiful than before. But more than that, it would stand as a symbol that even the darkest stories could find bright endings, that even the most unlikely love could triumph over every obstacle placed in its path. The transformation of Blackridge Manor happened slowly at first, then all at once, like spring arriving after a hard winter. Eleanor threw herself into the work with an energy that surprised even her. Each morning found her in the gardens with Silas, their hands deep in earth, coaxing life from soil that had known too much neglect. These were Catherine's favorites, Silas said one dewy morning, indicating a cluster of forget-me-nots that had somehow survived years of abandonment. His voice no longer caught when he spoke his first wife's name, though a gentle sadness remained. "Then we'll make sure they thrive," Eleanor replied, carefully clearing weeds from around the delicate blue flowers. "This garden should honor all the love that's lived here." It had been 3 months since the fire, since Eleanor had stood before the town and claimed her choice. The manor's wounds were healing, new timber replacing charred wood, fresh paint covering smoke stains, windows thrown open to let in light and air. But more than physical repairs, it was the spirit of the place that had transformed. The weekly market had become a source of joy for the community. Every Saturday, families arrived with baskets and children, turning the East Gardens into a festival of commerce and connection. Mrs. Henderson's preserves sold out within hours, and the flowers Eleanor tended with such care brightened homes throughout the county. "Miss Eleanor," young Lucy Turner ran up, clutching a handful of wildflowers. "Look what I found by the creek." Eleanor knelt to admire the child's bouquet, remembering when Lucy's parents had been among those who'd turned away in the town square. Now the girl visited weekly, drawn by Eleanor's gentle nature and the cookies Mrs. Henderson always had ready. "They're beautiful. Lucy, would you like to help me arrange them for the house?" As the child chattered happily, Eleanor caught Silas watching from the doorway, an expression of such tenderness on his scarred face that her heart skipped. These moments, simple, domestic, filled with possibility, were slowly exorcising the ghosts that had haunted Blackridge for so long. The teaching had started almost by accident. Sarah Mills had brought her younger siblings to the market, lamenting that the town's school teacher had left for California. Eleanor, overhearing, had offered to help with their letters. Word spread, and soon a dozen children gathered in the manor's library 3 afternoons a week, Eleanor guiding them through primers and sums. "You're a natural teacher," Silas observed one afternoon, finding her surrounded by eager students. "Your mother would be proud." "I hope so," Eleanor replied, helping little James Peterson with his arithmetic. She always said education was the greatest gift we could give or receive. It was after the children left that day that Silas led her to a room she'd never seen before. A bright, airy space on the 2nd floor, recently cleaned and painted. "I thought," he said carefully, "if you're to continue teaching, you should have a proper schoolroom. That is, if you'd like." Eleanor threw her arms around him, mindful of his still healing wounds. "It's perfect, oh, Silas, truly perfect." He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "You've given this house purpose again. Given me purpose. I wanted to give something back." "You've given me everything," she murmured against his chest. "A home, love, the freedom to choose my own path." "Not everything," he said, pulling back to meet her eyes. "Not yet. The rebuilding wasn't just physical or social. It was personal, too." Eleanor and Silas had grown closer through the work, their partnership deepening with each shared task. He taught her to ride, patiently guiding her through her fear of horses. She taught him to dance, laughing as he counted steps under his breath. In the evenings, They read together, played music, planned improvements for the estate. But it was in the quiet moments that their bond truly showed. The way Silas's hand would find hers when memories overwhelmed him. How Eleanor would wordlessly make his favorite tea when she saw the shadows gathering in his eyes. They were learning each other's rhythms, creating a dance of mutual support and understanding. One evening, as they walked through the restored rose garden, Silas stopped suddenly. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something." She turned to him, noting the serious set of his jaw. "Anything." "Am I being selfish? Keeping you here? You're young. You could have your pick of suitors. Men without my history, my baggage." Eleanor silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her certainty into the gesture. When they parted, she kept her hands on his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Listen to me, Silas Vane. You are not keeping me anywhere. I choose to be here. Choose you. Every single day. Your history is part of who you are. And I love all of you. The darkness and the light. The scars and the strength. But, no buts. Do you think I'm some delicate flower who doesn't know her own mind? Who can't see past a handsome face or a smooth talker?" She smiled to soften the words. "I've had offers. You know, that traveling merchant last month was quite persistent." Silas's eyes darkened with jealousy, making her laugh. "See, you're not the only one who chose. We chose each other, and that's what matters." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "What did I do to deserve you? You opened your door to a frightened girl. You showed her kindness when the world showed cruelty. You gave her space to discover her own strength." Eleanor traced his scar gently. "You loved her when she didn't even love herself." They were interrupted by Tom hurrying toward them, excitement clear on his weathered face. "Mr. Silas, Miss Eleanor Ryder's coming. Looks like Mrs. Ashford's carriage." Eleanor felt Silas tense. Victoria hadn't been seen since her disastrous visit months ago. Her arrival now could only mean trouble. They met her in the restored entrance hall. A united front. Victoria swept in, resplendent in black silk, her perfect composure intact. But Eleanor noticed signs of strain, lines around her eyes, a tightness to her smile. "Silas, Miss Wade." Victoria's gaze took in the improvements, the fresh flowers, the general air of happiness. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, regret. "Victoria," Silas acknowledged coolly. "To what do we owe this visit?" "I've come to apologize," Victoria said, the words seeming to physically pain her. "My behavior during my last visit was unworthy." Eleanor and Silas exchanged glances. This was unexpected. Victoria continued, her dignity intact despite her obvious discomfort. "I've had time to reflect, to realize that my grief over Catherine made me cruel. She wouldn't have wanted that." "No," Silas agreed quietly. "She wouldn't. I also came to warn you," Victoria added, her composure cracking slightly. "There are rumors in Denver about the two of you. Some are unkind. They say Miss Wade has bewitched you, that she's after the Vane fortune." "Let them talk," Eleanor said calmly. "Those who matter know the truth." Victoria studied her with new interest. "You've changed. When I first saw you, you seemed fragile. Now there's steel in you." "I had a good teacher," Eleanor replied, taking Silas's hand. "Yes, I suppose you did." Victoria sighed. "Catherine wrote to me, you know, before she died. She said Silas had depths of kindness I couldn't see, that his hardness was just armor. I didn't believe her then." "And now?" Silas asked. "Now I see a man who's found happiness again. A house coming back to life. Children playing where silence reigned." Victoria's smile was rueful. "Perhaps I was the fool, not you." She turned to Eleanor. "Take care of him, Miss Wade, and him of you. The world can be cruel to those who choose love over convention." "We've noticed," Eleanor said dryly. but we're stronger together than apart." Victoria nodded, preparing to leave, then paused. "The roses look beautiful. Catherine would be glad." After she left, Silas and Eleanor stood in comfortable silence. The visit had been brief but significant, an acknowledgement, if not quite a blessing, from Catherine's family. "That was unexpected," Eleanor finally said. "Victoria always did have a gift for surprises." Silas drew her close. "But she's right about the rumors. Our situation is unconventional. There will be talk." "There's already talk. I told you, I don't care." "But I do." He pulled back to look at her. "I care about your reputation, your future, which is why I think we should move up the wedding." Eleanor's heart leaped. "The roses haven't bloomed yet." "There are other flowers, other seasons." His voice grew urgent. "I don't want to wait any longer to call you my wife, unless you've changed your mind." "Never," Eleanor assured him. "When?" "2 weeks. The house is ready. I'm healed. And spring is here even if the roses aren't quite blooming." He smiled. "Mrs. Henderson has been dropping hints about having everything prepared anyway." Eleanor laughed. 2 weeks it is. A spring wedding for a spring love." The next days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Word of the impending wedding spread quickly, and Eleanor was touched by the response. Women who'd once turned away now offered help with her dress. Men who'd feared Silas volunteered to help prepare the grounds. Even the children insisted on gathering wildflowers for bouquets. The night before the wedding, Eleanor walked alone through the manor, marveling at the changes. Where dust and sorrow had reigned, now there was light and anticipation. The portrait gallery had been rehung, and Catherine's painting given a place of honor. Eleanor paused before it. "I'll take care of him," she whispered to the painted face. "I promise." A breeze stirred through the hall, setting the curtains dancing, and Eleanor could have sworn she felt approval in the air. Silas found her there, breaking tradition by seeing his bride before the wedding. "Can't sleep either." "Too happy," Eleanor admitted, leaning into his warmth. "I keep thinking I'll wake up back in my uncle's house, finding this was all a dream." "No dream," he assured her. "Or if it is, we're dreaming it together." They stood before Catherine's portrait, past and present meeting in peaceful acceptance. "Do you think she knows?" Eleanor asked softly. "That her hope for you came true?" "I think," Silas said slowly, "that love recognizes love, across time and space and even death. She wanted me to find happiness again. Thanks to you, I have." "We have," Eleanor corrected. "We found it together." Tomorrow would bring the wedding, the final transformation of Eleanor from the girl given away to the woman who chose her own destiny. The manor would ring with joy. The community would gather in celebration, and 2 wounded souls would pledge to face the future as one. But tonight, in the quiet of the restored manor, they simply stood together, building memories on the ashes of old pain, planting seeds of hope in soil made rich by tears. The ghosts were at peace. The future was bright, and love, resilient, stubborn, triumphant love, had won the day. The spring morning dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself celebrated the transformation at Black Ridge Manor. Eleanor stood in what had once been Catherine's room, now filled with the excited chatter of women who had become friends. Sarah Mills carefully arranged the wildflower crown while Mrs. Henderson fussed with the simple white dress Eleanor had chosen. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, tears gathering in her eyes, like hope itself come to life. Eleanor caught the older woman's hands. "We've all found hope again, haven't we, this house, all of us?" Through the window, she could see the gardens transformed. Where fire had scarred the earth, new life bloomed. Workers had erected a simple wooden arch twined with spring flowers, and benches had been arranged for the guests already gathering. The sight that moved her most was the memorial they'd created together. A small stone bench beneath the oak tree, with Catherine's name carved delicately into its surface. She would have wanted this. "Mrs." Henderson said, following Eleanor's gaze. "Joy returning to Black Ridge, love blooming again." A knock at the door interrupted them. Rose peered in, eyes bright with excitement. "Miss Eleanor, there's someone here to see you. Says he knew your father." Eleanor's heart skipped. In the hallway stood a man in military uniform, graying but straight-backed, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "Miss Wade, I'm Colonel Harrison. I served with both your father and Silas. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion on your wedding day." "Not at all. Colonel, you're most welcome." He smiled, and Eleanor could see why her father might have called this man friend. "I wanted to give you something. Your father entrusted it to me before he died. Asked me to wait until you married to deliver it." From his coat, he withdrew a small leather journal and a folded letter. Eleanor's hands trembled as she recognized her father's handwriting. "I'll give you privacy," the colonel said gently. "But Miss Wade, your father would be proud. Silas Vane is the finest man I've ever served with. You couldn't have chosen better." Alone in the sunlit hallway, Eleanor opened her father's letter. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then you've found love and I've missed the joy of walking you down the aisle. Know that I am with you in spirit, blessing your union. The enclosed journal contains advice I gathered for your future husband. Thoughts on marriage, love, and building a life together. But I suspect you'll teach him more than any words of mine could. You were always braver than you knew, stronger than you believed. Trust your heart, my darling girl. It will never lead you astray. The man you've chosen to marry has my complete blessing. May you build a love that weathers all storms, finds joy in simple moments, and creates a legacy of happiness. All my love, Father." Eleanor pressed the letter to her heart, tears flowing freely. Even in death, her parents had found a way to be part of this day. She tucked the journal away. She and Silas would read it together later, and returned to her preparations with a full heart. The ceremony was simple by society standards, but rich in meaning. The entire community had gathered, from the wealthiest ranchers to the humblest farmers. Children sat cross-legged at the front, wildflowers clutched in small hands. The workers who'd helped rebuild the manor stood proud in their Sunday best. When Eleanor appeared, a collective sigh rose from the gathering. She walked alone down the aisle. She belonged to no one but herself, her head high, her eyes fixed on Silas waiting beneath the flower arch. He stood tall and strong, the morning light softening his scarred features, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears. Reverend Mills, Sarah's father, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. When he asked who gave this woman to be married, Eleanor spoke clearly. "I give myself freely and with joy." The vows they exchanged were their own, written in quiet moments together. "Eleanor," Silas began, his deep voice carrying across the garden, "you came to me as payment for another's debt, but you became the greatest treasure of my life. You saw past the walls I'd built, found the man beneath the armor, and gave me reason to hope again. I promised to love you through all seasons, to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, to be your partner, protector, and greatest friend. You chose me when you could have chosen freedom. I choose you today and every day forward." Eleanor's voice was steady despite her tears. "Silas, you opened your door to a frightened girl and helped her become a woman who knows her own strength. You showed me that love could bloom even in the rockiest soil, that broken hearts could heal, that two people could build something beautiful from ashes. I promise to stand with you against any storm, to fill your days with music and laughter, to love not just who you are, but who you're becoming. You gave me choice when I had none. I choose you today and always." When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that rose could have been heard in the next county. Children threw wildflower petals. Mrs. Henderson sobbed openly, and even hardened ranchers dabbed at their eyes. The celebration that followed transformed Black Ridge's grounds into a festival. Long tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family. Musicians played lively tunes while couples danced on the lawn. Eleanor noticed former enemies talking together, children playing without fear in gardens once forbidden to them. "We did this," she murmured to Silas during a quiet moment. "We brought them together." "You did this," he corrected, spinning her into a dance. "I just provided the space. You provided the heart." As evening approached, Eleanor made her way to Catherine's memorial bench. She placed her bouquet there gently, whispering thanks to the woman whose tragedy had ultimately led to this joy. When she turned, she found Victoria Ashford watching from a respectful distance. "I wasn't sure I should come," Victoria said softly. "Catherine was your sister. Of course you should be here." Victoria approached the bench, running her fingers over her sister's name. "She would have loved this, all of it, the music, the children, the community coming together. It's what she always dreamed of for Black Ridge. Then we'll make sure it continues," Eleanor promised. "This is just the beginning." Victoria smiled, the first genuine warmth Eleanor had seen from her. "I believe you will. You have her spark, you know, different, but just as bright." As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Silas found Eleanor in the garden where they'd first worked side by side. The roses were still just buds, but full of promise. "No regrets?" he asked, drawing her close. "Only that my parents couldn't be here, but—" She showed him the Colonel's gift, sharing her father's letter. Silas read it with reverent hands, his voice thick when he finished. "He was a good man, the best. I'll try to be worthy of his trust." "You already are." They stood together, watching their guests continue the celebration by lantern light. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: running the estate, continuing Eleanor's teaching, navigating society as an unconventional couple. But tonight was for joy, for new beginnings, for love triumphant. "Do you remember," Eleanor asked, "what you said the night you brought me here? That what happened next was between me and whatever God I prayed to." "I remember everything about that night. I prayed for purpose, for belonging, for love." She smiled up at him. "Sometimes prayers are answered in the most unexpected ways. Through gambling debts and barn fires, through choosing to see past surfaces to the heart beneath, through staying when leaving would be easier, through building something beautiful from broken pieces." Silas kissed her then, there in the garden where new life waited to bloom. Around them, the celebration continued, a community healed, a house restored, a love story that would be told for generations. Later, as guests began to depart, each stopping to wish the couple well, Eleanor stood at the manor's great doors, the same doors where she'd entered as a frightened girl given away to pay a debt. Now she stood there as mistress of Black Ridge, teacher to the community's children, wife to a man she'd chosen freely. Old Samuel the blacksmith paused before her, hat in hand. "Miss Eleanor, Mrs. Vane, I owe you an apology. That day in the square is forgiven," Eleanor said firmly. "We all have a chance to do better going forward." "That we do, ma'am, that we do." As the last guest departed and quiet settled over Black Ridge, Eleanor and Silas walked through their home hand in hand. Every room held memory now, not just of sorrow, but of rebuilding, of hope, of love returning. In the study where Silas had first told her Catherine's story, Eleanor opened her father's journal. Together they read his words, advice about marriage, thoughts on love, memories of their friendship. It was like having Howard Wade there with them, blessing their union with his warmth and wisdom. "Look," Silas said, pointing to a passage near the end. "Tell my Eleanor that love is not about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections complement your own, someone who makes you want to be better than you are. He knew, Eleanor whispered. Somehow, he knew. As midnight approached, they climbed to the West Tower, once forbidden, now their favorite spot to watch stars. The view stretched for miles, showing the lights of town, the silver ribbon of the creek, the endless frontier sky. "I love you, Mrs. Vane," Silas said, the title new and wonderful on his lips. "And I love you, Mr. Vane." They sealed it with a kiss as stars wheeled overhead. Witnesses to a love story that had begun with betrayal and blossomed into triumph. The girl given away as payment had become a woman who chose her own destiny. The man trapped by grief had found healing in unexpected hands. Together, they'd rebuilt not just a house, but a community. Not just a life, but a legacy of love. Somewhere in the gentle night breeze, in the rustle of new leaves, in the promise of roses yet to bloom, the ghosts of Black Ridge Manor smiled and were at peace. Love had returned to these ancient walls, and with it, the promise of tomorrow's joy. The end. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please share in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts about Eleanor and Silas's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love triumphing over adversity, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and like this video. Your support by clicking the hype button helps these stories reach more listeners who love tales of the Old West. Until next time, keep believing in the power of choice, courage, and love.